What's going on, VC? It's your old pal Mikey Bananas from the Grown Man Record Night program, here to actually jump in on a thread. For those of you new in the VC, you may not remember or ever heard of threads. Back in the old days, there used to be a lot of threads that circulated through the VC that people jumped in on, chimed in on, put their own little personal twist on. It wasn't all just contest and look at what I got videos. The threads were really cool, and old school pal of ours, Kris, over at Dixieland Farm, started one this past week, which I thought was pretty interesting. He did a not a guilty pleasures video, he said, but a why is this in your collection video. And I think for other people in the VC, this could be a much more dynamic video. Like if you, for instance, you found out, like, I don't know, Marty Worm had this huge collection of like polka records or something, you'd be like, what the hell? You know, but if you know me, or if you've listened to our stream for any amount of time over the past decade, you know that, not only do I love, the classic rock and stoner doom and metal and punk rock and synthwave and stuff like that, but I have a very soft spot in my heart for cheese, especially like 80s cheese, so cheesy 80s soundtrack. And so if you saw me holding up records like this, you would probably think nothing of it. And I don't have these in my collection to be funny or, ironic. I love these albums. They kick ass. True story. I've had Caribbean Queen stuck in my head for like 6 days. So much so that I kind of looked it up to see how to play some of the riffs on guitar, because it was driving me nuts. But I love stuff like this. And you know how much I love Rocky IV soundtracks. Stuff like that. But anyway, there are some things in my collection that are a little askew, and you may not think of when you think of me or this channel and the rest of the gang over here. Growing up, I became a huge classical music fan, and my parents are not like that. I did not grow up with a family that shoved piano lessons down my throat and taught me the value of fancy music and stuff. That wasn't like that. I found it through, I don't know if it was cartoons that did it, but I knew as 4 or 5 years old, I could turn the radio all the way to the left and I could find this music. And something about the way that I now realize that it's like harmonies, how, the different overtones that match, and it would actually provoke like a physical response for me, even as a little kid. And where things just line up just right. And now I realize that to be like harmonies, which does the same thing to me with like guitar harmonies and stuff. But anyway, so I started seeking out classical music and stuff. My parents were always like, what the hell is wrong with this kid? That's cool, but where did this come from? So anyway, I was like that very, very early. And then this movie came out. It changed everything for me. Amadeus, the 84 film, that's just about the time. I would have been about 7 years old. So I already knew that I liked classical music. And this movie, tremendous movie, I think, anyway, it gave it a face for me. And it was really, in this same time period, Amadeus and Eddie Van Halen in my head were like the same rock star, the same type person, the same vibe. And this gave it a name and a face, at least in my head. And this is when I started actively buying classical music and expanding my knowledge of it. True story, I'm not a tattoo guy, but if I was ever to get a tattoo, it would be that thing at the top right there. I think that's the coolest symbol ever. But anyway, that kind of started me down the path of classical music. Dude, when in middle school, when I'm out mowing yards for $10 a pop and stuff, I had my cassette Walkman, and I had Guns N' Roses, I had Poison, LA Guns, Living Colour, and the Amadeus soundtrack. I loved everything about it. And one of the Requiem from that, I still want that played at my funeral. I've said that since I was 12 years old. Anyway, moving on. I kind of have a different story about how I got into collecting records than most people in the VC. I don't hear people talking about collecting in this way in this community much, but as a kid, I had my parents' record collection, but I was of the age to where I went out and bought cassettes. And then eventually that turned into CDs, and then eventually that turned into buying used CDs, much like we do nowadays with records, going to shops and buying used CDs and stuff. So it wasn't until much later I started buying records. And the reason I was buying records was I was into hip-hop and the turntablism culture. I was seeking out two things for funsies, because I had two turntables and a mixer, and I was looking for drum breaks. The core of any good hip-hop DJ. I was looking for drum breaks, and I was looking for weirdo children samples. And so, through that, I have found stuff like, following directions. This is the first stuff I collected when I started collecting records, was I was looking for weirdo shit like this. Because you could find some cool, here's one called My Hands. Look at me. Circle game. I pull my ears. I mean, that's Sample City right there for anybody. Just I was big into like DJ Shadow, Cut Chemist, Newmark, guys like that. So that's, I mean, here's another one. The weirder the better. Getting to Know Myself. Includes the song Sammy. Well, thank Christ it's got Sammy on this particular issue. But yeah, it teaches you how to like learn about your, oh my God, yeah. And stuff like this. Sing Along in Hebrew. Again, Sample City. I didn't know nothing about Hebrew when I picked this up, but I was like, man, I knew there's going to be some cool stuff on there. That you mix with some, like a James Brown style drum break. You start putting these samples over top of stuff. It's a lot of fun. And I was I played in a band with a DJ, and I knew a lot of good DJs. I just did it for funsies. I wasn't like Mr. King Shit of Turd Mountain or anything. It was just for fun and get all loaded, a couple of turntables, and just screw around for hours and hours and hours. It was a lot of fun. And to this day, I don't really do that much anymore. I've run out of space to where I can't do that a bunch. But I collect everything Sesame Street to this day. I'll never pass up Sesame Street. This is actually a good record. Bob McGrath's record. It's actually a really good folk record, I think. I mean, it's kind of wrapped around Sesame Street, but I think it's a very pretty record. It's actually, it's a good listen. Not just like, haha, Sesame Street, but like, I mean, anything like this. And this is obviously from a library, because you remember these super thick, like, plastic covers that are in here? Kind of crazy. Definitely, yes, children's room. Oh, Forsyth County Public Library, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There you go. But yeah, I mean, I would frame that right there. That's badass. And finally, the other thing, I went through this, along the way of collecting, this is how to finish that up. In collecting drum breaks and weirdo children's records and stuff for samples, I realized, like, oh man, I picked up a Grand Funk record, and like, well shit, this is a badass record, so I'm gonna listen to it all the way through. And like, oh shit, there's a Beatles, and there's a Led Zeppelin, and the Guess Who, I think I know them, and put them on, and like, next thing you know, I'm buying albums because they're great, and I'm listening to the whole thing, and I'm not just looking for DJ stuff. And that's how I started collecting records. But anyway, along that path, kind of around that same time, it's one of those, this is why, guilty pleasure doesn't really apply to me a lot of the times, is because, especially early on, I was buying every record I could get my frickin' hands on. I didn't care if it had a funny looking cover, or I thought it'd be interesting, or just kind of something weirdo to check out for $1 at Goodwill. Hell yeah, let's give it a shot. And something I discovered along the way, and I actually started actively collecting these, was these, and this is the kind of the weirdest thing I do, cruise ship records. This is an unforgettable evening with the Calypso Playboys. So this is obviously like, you go on a cruise, and these guys are like the house band. They're playing like down in the dance hall, and then they have their like records for sale and shit, so you can like pick them up. This is actually autographed by the guys, and I've got several of these. This is by far my favorite, and it's Calypso music. So I've always loved and appreciated like reggae and dub especially. But Calypso's a little different. Well, it's Calypso. It's faster, different patterns, different rhythms. But there's a version of Deo on there. This is my favorite version of Deo I've ever heard. And I need to throw a needle drop on here. But it's my favorite by far. So this was one of the weird. And I was actually like, I wasn't going on eBay and Discogs and looking for these like to buy. But when I went into Goodwill, the thought did cross my mind. It was like, damn, I hope there's some Calypso cruise ship records in there, because that's my shit. I would pop across one, I'd be like, yeah, man, like finding a cool ass rock record or something. So I don't know. Oh, recorded live on the Norwegian Caribbean lines. That's awesome. That's kick ass, man. So I don't know, man. Let's get this thread going. You guys pop a little video out. See what's the weirdest stuff in your collection that people would be like, why is this in such and such collection? I want to see it. You guys have a good day.
Daylight come and me want go home. Me say day, oh. Daylight come and me want go home. Well, I work all night down and drink over rum. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Pack banana till the morning come. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Well, I work the banana boat all night long. Daylight come and me wanna go home. All of the workmen gonna sing this song. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Here's a beautiful bunch of ripe banana. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Lights to give you reference. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go home. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go home. 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot one. Daylight come and me wanna. You got a 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot bunch. Daylight come and me wanna go. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go. Day oh, day oh. Daylight come and me wanna go. I beg you come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and me wanna go. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and me wanna go. The young girls sweet, now they spending your money. Daylight come and me wanna go. When they do, they gonna call you honey. Daylight come and me